Twitter files, Twitter files, Twitter files, Twitter, Elon, Twitter, Twitter files, Twitter. It's said that Franklin D. Roosevelt carried on several affairs during his marriage to Eleanor, most notably with his secretary, Lucy Mercer. It's long been rumored that President Eisenhower had an intimate relationship with his driver and secretary, Kay Summersby, during the Second World War, something that she did confirm in a deathbed autobiography. President Kennedy was a legendary philanderer who even competed for women with his own father, which is gross. A 2019 biography on Barbara Bush revealed that she suffered from depression long ago, purportedly due to a decade-long affair that her husband had with one of his personal aides. What does this all have to do with anything? Let's find out. UNFTR. The upstanding bastions of fidelity in the modern era, where presidents are concerned at least, would most certainly be Jimmy Carter, George W., and Barack Obama. Now, many of you know how I feel about Jimmy Carter, but considering that Noam Chomsky was just found palling around with Jeffrey Epstein, I'm not sure my heart can handle much more. So here's hoping that Jimbo leaves us with some dignity intact. W and Obama, on the other hand, while paragons of faithfulness, were also outright mass murderers. George W. Bush is directly responsible for the deaths of between 280 and 315,000 Iraqi civilians, according to estimates from the Watson Institute. Barack Obama directly authorized and oversaw a total of 563 drone strikes in Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen. Between 384 and 807 civilians were killed in these countries as a result. Obama is the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Donald Trump continued this unilateral authorization of drone strikes from Obama's tenure, but he revoked the policy of transparency, so we might never know the extent of the damage inflicted on nations where we had no formal declarations of war. He's been impeached, indicted, divorced, and bankrupt, and all of these things happened more than once. He even attempted to overthrow verified election results and incited an insurrection. Trump has announced his re-election bid for president. Bad behavior among the rich and powerful is hardly news, and it extends beyond the Oval Office, obviously. Clarence Thomas is bought and paid for by a billionaire who collects Nazi memorabilia. He remains a Supreme Court justice. Barry Bonds juiced for years, but he was the best slugger of the steroid era, so all he has is an asterisk. John Lennon had a legendary temper, once yelling at his son Sean so badly he permanently damaged his hearing and sent him to the hospital. J.K. Rowling, arguably the most successful author of all time, commercial author at least, and she's a TERF and a dick. Michael Jackson settled so many pedophile accusations, it's hard to keep track, and currently there's a Broadway show running all about him. Mel Gibson, still working. Ellen DeGeneres is apparently a flaming asshole, but she'll always be Dory to me.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming.
99 and I talked about it in show notes this week, and at the end of the episode for the podcast and post-show musings, we had a spirited discussion about all of this. And the central question is, can we separate the artist from the art? Can we separate the deeds from the powerful person, etc.? It's an age-old question that inspires great debate, especially when one of your inspirations is revealed to be kind of a cad. Now, I love Finding Nemo. The Beatles? Come on. The 1986 Mets did enough cocaine to kill a team of horses, cheated on their wives, and got into bar fights, and I live for this team. Though not my particular cup of tea, I understand the magic of Harry Potter. I can probably recite Braveheart from memory. And if MJ comes on the radio, I'm probably not turning it off, although I do roll up the windows.
Roll them up.
We all have our red lines. Mine, as you know, are typically around the marginalized and most especially Native people. I suppose this reflection is partly about the culture wars and cancel culture, about wokeness and political correctness. It's all gone too far, and yet again, not far enough. It seems as though we come face to face with cultural reckonings on a daily basis. It's something that we haven't really addressed here on the show because we prefer to be issue-driven. But it feels impossible to ignore because culture wars have infected the body politic and the national discourse so completely. So this episode looks at 3 different but related situations that really, to me, come down to integrity.
Text message obtained by the New York Times, sent by Carlson to one of his producers in the hours after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The host allegedly describes watching a video of a group of people he calls Trump guys violently attacking a, quote, Antifa kid, calling it dishonorable and adding, it's not how white men fight.
Was this the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back at Fox? Was it Tucker's text saying he hates Donald Trump? Was it the abusive environment he fostered on his show? That Murdoch's ex-fiancée supposedly had a crush on Tucker because advertisers felt they couldn't support his show? Were his texts about election denials too revealing? Did Murdoch blame him for the Dominion suit? Did they finally come around to the fact that Tucker's toxic and destructive rhetoric was destroying the fabric of this nation, one diseased Fox viewer mind at a time? Probably not. Angelo Carusone, CEO of Media Matters, the right-wing watchdog organization, recently appeared on Brian Tyler Cohen's show to explain an alternate theory that, in my estimation, likely holds more water. And I'll get to that in a second. Tucker was arguably let go from Fox at the peak of his powers. He was free to break rank from other hosts and dabble in conspiracy theories and not-so-casual racism in a unique way. This led some to believe it was a power play on the part of Murdoch to exert his dominance and show that Fox is bigger than its hosts. That's not without precedent when you consider figures like Glenn Beck, Bill O'Reilly, even those who left on their own accord like Shepard Smith and Megyn Kelly. Regardless of the circumstances surrounding their departures, no former Fox host has been able to recapture the audience that they had while under Murdoch's umbrella. And that goes for other networks as well. One quick point before getting to Carusone's take. Most of these former pundits have been able to amass significant audiences. But a lot like when Howard Stern left terrestrial radio for satellite, they all lost the amplification power of broadcast and the influence that it still has on the power structure in D.C. Fox is the preeminent power broker in the conservative universe, alone atop the mountain. Whereas the liberal spectrum relies on a patchwork of influencer networks and outlets. One cannot obtain power in the conservative ecosystem without first bowing to the corporate masters at Fox. But here's where Carusone might have identified a chink in Fox's armor. Quote, "The dirty secret about Fox News is that it is one of the only commercial TV channels that doesn't need a single advertisement to be profitable, if not the only one. In fact, Fox could have $0 in ad revenue and still have at least a 35% profit margin. This is the result of carriage fees and the guaranteed revenue they provide Fox." End quote. You see, Fox receives between $2 and $3 per cable subscription on nearly every single cable platform. That is an enormous haul for one organization, and it's made Fox pretty much bulletproof in the past. The Dominion settlement, while substantial, is manageable considering Fox is sitting on more than $4 billion in cash on hand and can either defray some of the cost of the settlement through insurance or a tax write-off. Can it continue to weather these kinds of settlements considering there are multiple settlements on the horizon that could conceivably be larger than Dominion? Probably not. No company is that bulletproof. But remember that Fox is still mostly controlled by the Murdoch family, which has an estimated net worth of between $17 billion and $21 billion. There are miles to go before counting out this family. But the carrier fee negotiations are what has made Fox bulletproof until now. Carusone has suggested, based on credible leaks from the carrier negotiations, that things aren't going as well as previous negotiations, and that Tucker's persona is one of the major reasons for that. The revelations that Tucker, among others, lied about election coverage and then went a step further to try and push the notion that January 6th was just a mass tour of the Capitol has purportedly been a huge sticking point for the cable companies. The fact that Tucker's time slot has lost a significant share of viewers would be less troubling if these negotiations weren't in full swing and so mission critical to Fox. The reason is that Tucker's show had difficulty attracting legitimate advertisers, but his dominance, adding more than 1 million viewers during that time slot than O'Reilly ever mustered, was enough to keep the pressure on providers to keep the popular host. So Murdoch's gamble to separate from Carlson, at least as Media Matters sees it, is more of a power play to eliminate a sticking point in the carrier negotiations. And it makes a ton of sense when you consider the economics of it. As far as Carlson's concerned, speculation is rampant about where he'll end up. Patrick Bet-David, the CEO and talking head of a conservative online media outlet called Valuetainment, just publicly offered Tucker $100 million over 5 years and an equity stake in the company. Some believe that he'll start his own media empire in the vein of the Daily Wire and take his show to Rumble. Newsmax and OAN, the fledgling conservative media outlets, are talking points, but it's hard to imagine Carlson downgrading in such a fashion. My fear would be some sort of hybrid, like a partnership with Daily Wire that involves some other billionaires, something that incorporates folks like Glenn Greenwald and packages the whole thing up as a new network that also finds its way to cable. Like Rumble on steroids. Either way, Tucker is something of a phenomenon, and he's different than like O'Reilly or Glenn Beck. The text revelations seem to have little effect on his credibility with his audience, which is why he's still at the peak of his powers. And now, he's aggrieved, and he has an axe to grind. I'm not suggesting that he has it in him to take on Murdoch, but his milquetoast presentation while delivering divisive content is an effective cocktail. You can be sure that the evil billionaire roundtable is swirling with ideas on how to leverage this moment while Murdoch has his eye on the cable negotiations. It's a dangerous time. Twitter files, Twitter, Elon, Twitter, Twitter files. The kerfuffle between Matt Taibbi and Mehdi Hasan is old news, and their war has only devolved since this moment. Taibbi's been on a tear, dragging Hasan through the mud and calling his integrity into question. And both men are receiving support from their respective camps, and some of it's surprising and some is not. For Taibbi, the calculus since departing Rolling Stone appears to be subscriber acquisition purely. While Substack does not release their subscriber figures or revenue, they do provide a range, and it's estimated that Taibbi ranks in between the high hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars annually as one of the biggest writers on the platform. By the way, so too does his Twitter Files collaborator and disgraced former Times columnist, Barry Weiss. Now, a lot's happened since the release of the Twitter Files and Mehdi Hasan's utter takedown of Taibbi in rather embarrassing fashion, on Taibbi's part at least, and it's not worth rehashing because it moves so quickly and matters so little.
It just doesn't matter!
What's of supreme importance is the amount of money at play in the independent media ecosystem. Journalists on the right and the left are getting hip to pocketing surplus capital that their work generates. How very socialist. Or is it capitalist? I already covered Taibbi in another video, which I'll link below if you haven't seen it. And as I noted in that piece, I've long been an admirer of Taibbi dating back to my alternative journalism days. He's done tremendous work over the years, and he's often referred to as the Hunter Thompson of my generation. But, as I mentioned, Thompson was also fallible. In fact, he was homophobic, misogynistic, and belligerent. But man, could he write. Personally, I think Hemingway was an asshole too. And as long as we're assailing the character of male American literary icons, check out Donovan Hohn's soul-crushing piece in The Atlantic from 2015 that eviscerates Henry David Thoreau. That one really set me back. But the modern era of the rogue writer preening for ideological audiences and leaning into culture war issues has taken on a different character with the ability to monetize their status as public figures to such an extreme. The point I was driving at in the prior Taibbi video is that he may have practiced journalism in the past, but he's not a journalist. He's a writer in the vein of H.L. Mencken or Hunter Thompson. And writers play by looser rules and standards. Now, he would counter that by criticizing the corporate media. For example, how MSNBC got Russiagate so wrong, or the New York Times helped sell the Iraq War to the public on a false premise. But being right about that doesn't make me wrong about him. Stones, glass houses, and all of that. And now for the gut punch. No sooner did I do a hero video about Noam Chomsky, and this news comes out.
And then there's Noam Chomsky, the famed leftist political activist and professor who was scheduled to fly with Epstein and to have dinner at Epstein's Manhattan townhouse in 2015. He maintains his relationship with Epstein is, quote, no one's business, and that they discussed academia.
Let's just say that it was quite the shock when the Journal discovered that he was palling around with Jeffrey Epstein several years ago. So apparently Chomsky and his wife were scheduled to be flown to dinner with Epstein to talk politics, and that it wasn't maybe their only encounter. While the flight itself has yet to be verified, when reached for comment, Chomsky said he had indeed met with Epstein on several occasions and that it was nobody's business. And that one particular meeting included Woody Allen of all people. And he called it an evening spent with a great artist. Ugh. Chomsky more recently provided a fuller statement to the Harvard Crimson, and here are some highlights. Quote, like all of those in Cambridge who met and knew him, we knew that he had been convicted and served his time, which means that he re-enters society under prevailing norms, which, it is true, are rejected by the far right in the U.S. and sometimes by unscrupulous employers, Chomsky wrote. I've had no pause about close friends who spent many years in prison and were released. That's quite normal in free societies. I've often attended meetings and had close interactions with colleagues and friends on Harvard and MIT campuses, often in labs and other facilities, built with donations from some of the worst criminals of the modern world, people whose crimes are well known, and who are, furthermore, honored by naming the buildings in their honor and lavishly praised in other ways. That's far more serious than accepting donations, obviously, and these are huge donations. I've met all sorts of people, including major war criminals. I don't regret having met any of them, end quote. Now here's what I love about this and what I hate about it at the same time. I love that he still has the capacity to call out the hypocrisy of the wealthy class, whitewashing history through donations. It's no different than how we can call Obama and Bush decent men because they attended church and remained faithful, regardless of the death count of innocents. Here's what I hate. Why participate then? Was Chomsky's career dependent on serving the donor class in academia? I don't think so. Is there nothing revolting enough about the actions of a man like Epstein that would cause him to simply take a pass? And while we're at it, how is dining with war criminals okay? It's gross. And his explanation, while stinging and accurate in the sense that our entire society is built on hypocrisy, doesn't make it okay. Fuck Jeffrey Epstein. And yes, fuck you too, Uncle Noam. So what do these have in common? What's the thread here? Why highlight Taibbi, Chomsky, and Tucker? Well, it's more than just a matter of convenience. In the oligarchy episode, I talked about the need for a new approach, a general system theory that incorporates the natural world and life-sustaining economic models into our political structure, and how it would be impossible to achieve this unless we removed money from the political system and began thinking holistically about the world around us. There's a disease within the corporate oligarchy and the donor class with a very specific nature. It's the disease of patriarchy and the characteristics ascribed to masculine forms of power. Now, to be clear, I'm not making a feminism argument, and as 99 has pointed out, even using this type of language is itself anachronistic. It's important to make a distinction between gender and classically ascribed traits. Western forms of power assume patriarchal structures that reflect homogeneous male characteristics. We often associate these with force, brutality, competitiveness, rigidity, and dogma. Whereas we consider the more feminine traits found in nature to be warm, flexible, nurturing, strong, and egalitarian. The trait that allows a figure like Chomsky to rationalize his association with a known abuser is the same one that views a mass murderer as a man of character, so long as he conforms to the patriarchal norms of society. They should both be wrong. As Michael Corleone said,
"We're both part of the same hypocrisy."
If we can open our minds to new thinking that builds on the success of prior periods and eliminates the failures, maybe we can get past this fractured period of cancel culture and cancellation and woke wars and all that shit. Matt Taibbi's work on the financial crisis isn't entirely undone by his association with figures like Elon Musk or Tucker Carlson. Noam Chomsky's contributions to the political discourse in this country aren't diminished by his clear lack of personal judgment. Glenn Greenwald's worldview made him the perfect vessel for a particular topic of great importance. Tucker Carlson's just a fucking prick. The one thing they have in common, as open-minded as they believe themselves to be, is a homogeneous patriarchal view of the world. It's something that I struggle to overcome at my advanced age. It's not easy, and I'm actually working on it. Point being, no one person is perfect. And as consumers and citizens, we're right to question the motives of those in charge of the policies that govern our lives and the information we consume. When these same figures blanch at any hint of criticism of their lives and views and retreat to name-calling and revenge, it's indicative of a fragile masculine ego that cannot absorb criticism and thereby reflect and evolve. To me, that's one of the more powerful aspects of the culture wars, if you want to call it that. Of course, it's playing out badly because it's jarring us from the comfort of the patriarchal mindset that has informed Western culture since inception. These habits will die hard. But in discomfort comes learning. And only through learning can we evolve. FDR delivered the nation from despair. Chomsky informed and inspired generations of writers, philosophers, linguists, and regular people. Taibbi inspired me to write. Glenn Greenwald taught me to question the nature of the surveillance state. The fact that John Lennon was an asshole doesn't make the music bad. It makes him a bad guy who made great music. The art and the artist. The conflict is ever thus. I know this much. My children don't give a flying fuck about any of these people. Not yet, at least. And if and when they ever do, they'll be reduced to names in history books or old video clips on some new social platform. They won't personally have meaning to them, but their contributions to society will, whether they know it or not. I'm all about tearing down personal legacies as human beings while preserving their work. There's zero conflict in my soul about admiring Noam Chomsky's work and being wholly disappointed in him as a person. I'll forever fight the urge to moonwalk when Beat It comes through the speaker, but it'll be there. I'll get chills listening to JFK's soaring rhetoric while knowing that he wasn't an unreachable deity, he was a scumbag of the highest order. It just tells me we have miles to go as a species, and that a better future is possible if we can align the grand visions of young, new thinkers who are willing to cancel these paragons of society while preserving any intellectual gifts that they might have bestowed. That's progress. That's the natural character that a general system theory requires to think more holistically about the world. Above it all, lest there be any confusion, let me conclude by saying conclusively, Tucker Carlson's an asshole with no redeeming qualities. Matt Taibbi has lost the plot and is no longer offering anything of substance other than to line his own pockets. And Uncle Noam, brilliant mind, terrible guy. There, I said it. And here endeth whatever this was. See you next time.